This is what I've been waiting for. I have soldiered on for 300 years to meet someone like you.
The very first apostle we meet during the Black Swordsman arc makes it clear to everyone reading Berserk that these things were depravity pushed to its absolute limits and given a human form. Well, mostly human. The Snake Lord made it very clear to us that all most apostles cared about was crushing people and eating bones, and vice versa. The slug count continued that maddening trend, but showed that at least an apostle could retain a shred of their humanity, despite having literally traded it for immense power as a demon. But it is the third apostle we meet in the reading order, and the first within Berserk's in-universe timeline, that throws everything that an apostle is supposed to be out of the window, despite embodying what they are down to a T. The immortal enigma known as Nosferatu Zodd is worshipped by some, not believed to be real by others, but feared and revered by everyone who lives by the sword. He is the first apostle that Guts ever met, the one who told him of his true fate, and the only one so far who doesn't want to outright eat him without getting a good fight out of it. In many ways, Zodd's actions control the story of Berserk, and we're going to tell you how. This is Nosferatu Zodd's origins explored. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The Band of the Falcon's first real challenge turns out to be an immortal war god, Nosferatu Zodd's first appearance. In the 3 years that Guts spends with Griffith's Band of the Falcon, he manages to rise up to the position of Raiders captain, and now leads a platoon of at least 500 men. Their legendary exploits during the 100-year war between Midland and Tudor makes the mercenary group the heart of the former's offensive forces. Not once have the ingenious Griffith's battle plans failed to deliver on his promises, and Guts' sword was a huge factor in seeing those plans come into fruition. But now, at this Tudor fortress that the Band of the Falcon was besieging, an unexpected situation had arisen. Guts had sent 50 of his raiders into the inner citadel of the fortress to ensure its surrender. None of them had returned. When Griffith and the rest of the band heard this, Judo brought up a rumor he had heard during the campaign which kind of sets the tone for the character we are exploring today. He murmurs the name Zodd to himself, and when Rickert overhears and repeats it out loud, an eerie silence falls over the White Falcon's forces. Judo explains that before this battle commenced, he had heard that the Tudor armies had added a person called Nosferatu Zodd to their ranks. This immediately unnerves both Rickert and Corcus, the latter of whom had been berating Guts' raiders for failing in such a pathetic fashion up until now. Casca, at least, seems to be aware of Zodd's legend, but Pippin is clueless, so Rickert fills us in. Amongst mercenary bands and warriors of a regular army alike, the name Zodd was both worshipped and feared. He was a legendary swordsman who had cut through hundreds, if not thousands, of enemies on the battlefield. But his demonic swordplay wasn't the only reason Zodd put the fear of God within men's minds. You see, every time a rumor went about that Zodd had finally died, he would resurface on some other battlefield a world apart from the last one he was seen at, as if to spite the non-believers into realizing his own legend was true. And what's worse is, he had been doing this for the past 100 years at the very least, which is about as long as Midland's current war with Tudor had lasted. People revered Zodd as a god of the battlefield, and due to his seemingly undying status, they dubbed him Nosferatu, aka the Immortal One. As Corcus and Rickert agree about the man's very existence, Judo muses that such a challenge would make Guts leap into it head first, and indeed, that's exactly what happens. After watching 50 of his men die at the hands of a single swordsman, and Dilos literally die in his arms muttering Zodd's name, only God himself could have stopped him from entering that stronghold, and his presence was in short supply. Guts walks into the citadel determined to avenge his fallen comrades, but pales at the first sight of Nosferatu Zodd, with a couple of dead falcons hanging from his massive sword. Guts charges Zodd immediately, but is hurled back by the corpses of the very comrades he was here to save in the first place. He is gripped in place by Zodd's overwhelming presence, but has no time to come to grips with his own fear because Zodd was on the move. The hulking brute swung his sword so hard at Guts that he destroyed a pillar supporting the room they were in, but the swordsman was able to counter and parry well enough to not die immediately. This leaves the purported god of warfare ecstatic, as his sword had not been stopped like this in the last 50 years, showing us that what Zodd truly values in life is the absolute maximum of strength. He is an expert swordsman who is able to read his opponent's intent in a matter of seconds, as he demonstrates when he deduces Guts' plan to end the fight with one single strike. He wagers that Guts' confidence comes from the length of his blade, but is confident that his brains will be on the floor before he can complete his mad gamble. Zodd accepts this swordsman's challenge and engages him, but to his utter surprise, Guts not only manages to break his sword, but also drive his own sword deep into Zodd's right shoulder, slicing into both his arms. No human could have survived such a heavy blow from the raider captain of the Band of the Falcon, but alas, Zodd was not a human after all. As he reveled in the fact that Guts had managed to cut him so deep, Zodd let slip the fact that no human had ever pushed him this far in his 300 years of slaughter, as he transformed into a massive horned black lion-esque figure and prepared for round 2. For the first time in his life, Guts was terrified of facing an opponent in the field of battle, and in this case, he would be justified. Zodd was quite literally unlike anything he had faced before. The Immortal One was delighted by the fact that Guts had even pushed him far enough to show his true form, and relishes the blood boiling through his veins at the moment. He thinks his 300 years of existence had been validated by someone as worthy as Guts, and demands that the swordsman continue to fight him, and not leave him disappointed with the action. Guts is still trying to process the fact that a monster like Zodd can even exist. He is practically motionless when Zodd advances on him, and treats him like his personal ragdoll. After smashing a couple of pillars with the swordsman's body, Zodd is amused at his retaliation, which couldn't even place a dent on his left horn, and he just starts laughing like a madman. He slams Guts into yet another pillar and asks him if that was all the fight he had left in him. Zodd retracts that statement and says Guts fought well for a human, but even if he had nothing left in the tank, Nosferatu Zodd was not one who'd show mercy to an opponent. He picks Guts up and prepares to rip him apart just like the rest of his raiders when Griffith arrives with a rescue team in tow. The Band of the Falcon stuns Zodd by firing a volley of crossbow bolts at him and letting loose another volley before he has time to recover. Zodd is understandably pissed off by this development and lunges at the band for defiling his sacred battle with Guts. Griffith manages to make it to his raider captain as the death of his comrades keeps Zodd distracted. He orders Casca to withdraw and is just about to escape with Guts when Zodd corners them once again, claiming their fight would not be over until Guts' heart stopped beating. Zodd attacks Guts and Griffith at the same time, intent on ripping them to shreds, but is halted in his tracks by a pincer move they execute at the last moment, which actually causes him to lose his left arm. He is over the moon by this point, having found not one but 2 humans who can wound him in such a way after wandering through battlefields for 300 years. But he is also saddened by the fact that he will lose them as soon as he had found them, for Zodd had tail-whipped Griffith into unconsciousness and hurled Guts away with the very arm that Griffith had severed. He decides to kill Griffith first, thinking Guts to be more worthy of his final death-dealing stroke, but that's when everything changes once again. The Immortal One's advance is stopped by the mysterious pendant that Griffith keeps on himself. Zodd is shocked into taking a few steps back because, as an apostle, he knows exactly what Griffith's good luck charm is supposed to be. He wonders out loud how a cub like him could possess the Egg of the King, the Crimson Behelit, and murmurs to himself about the God Hand. Zodd then concludes that this must be that kind of a ploy, and starts laughing to himself like a madman once again. But this time, he retreated instead of advancing on the humans, and left Guts with an ominous warning about Griffith and his dream. If the Band of the Falcon could truly call themselves Griffith's friends, especially Guts himself, then they should be warned. When Griffith's dream collapsed, a death would visit them all from which they will not be able to escape. Like a demon from hell, the Immortal One spawns massive black wings and flies off into the black of night, leaving everyone there wondering what his existence even meant, especially the man who would become the Black Swordsman in the future. Nosferatu Zodd's introduction to Berserk took place over 4 separate chapters, but in his first appearance he showed us that not only was he a force to be reckoned with, he was also somewhat aware of the things of the past and the future, as he left Guts with a prophecy that would come to haunt him for the rest of his life. And, after learning that Griffith was a holder of the Crimson Behelit, he also began following the base impulse that all apostles had in common, preparing for the arrival of a new member of the God Hand. He carved the path for Femto's ascension and acted as its immortal guardian. Zodd's involvement with the Eclipse and the Skull Knight. The next time Zodd appears is during a battle, as might be expected of him, but fulfilling an unexpected role. You see, as the battle for Doldry raged on, Guts was engaged in a fierce one-on-one confrontation with the renowned General Bosscone of the Holy Purple Rhino Knights and was somehow on the back foot. Bosscone's heavy axe had split Guts' sword into 2, and he was now standing in front of Bosscone's charge with nothing but a knife in his hand. Zodd appears on a cliff nearby on horseback and throws his massive curved sword onto the battlefield, right at Guts' feet. Griffith notices the sword and immediately commands Guts to pick it up and use it for victory, which the swordsman does with gnarly efficiency. But after the battle, Guts is perplexed by the sword's sudden appearance, and its physical appearance as well, for he remembers the fight against Zodd like it had happened yesterday. As he leaves Doldry victorious, he drops the sword behind him, and we see Zodd riding away from the battlefield talking about the eclipse approaching soon. Whatever that might be, eh guys? Well, we learn more about it in Zodd's next appearance, which takes place 40 full chapters later in the last panel of chapter 68. The Apostle Wild, near the brink of death, kidnaps a tortured and mangled Griffith in hopes of saving himself with the help of the God Hand. Apparently, Zodd has been going around telling apostles that Griffith is some sort of chosen one, destined to join the Guardian Angels of Desire as their 5th member. As such, he should have the Crimson Behelit on him. But when Wild notices that the Behelit is not there, he flips his lid. He starts taunting the Band of the Falcon by showing them Griffith was in no state to lead them anymore, and decides to kill the White Falcon if he himself cannot survive. But that is when Nosferatu Zodd arrives. He runs Wild through with his own horns, and an argument ensues between the two of them. Wild contends that the commandment passed on to them by their angels was to do as they willed, and that if he killed Griffith then and there, it would be out of his own free will. Zodd replies that in that case, killing Wild would be a product of his own free will, and guts the apostle quite literally. He turns to Griffith and tells him that the Behelit would turn to him at his most desperate hour of need, because that's how it has always been, and before departing, informs an inquiring Guts that he would learn what the eclipse was soon enough. True to his word, we see 5 short chapters later that it was in actuality a nocturnal feast for all demonkind, in celebration of the ascendance of their 5th angel, the Falcon of Darkness, Femto. Everything that Zodd had predicted in his first appearance had come true after chapter 73. When Griffith lost his dream of getting his own kingdom, he sank into such a deep despair that he couldn't even properly end his own life. In that despair, the Crimson Behelit returned to his hand, and he activated it, summoning the God Hand and the Apostles for the nocturnal feast known as the Eclipse. Griffith learned that in order to realize his dream, he must reincarnate himself as a demonic angel and complete the God Hand, condemning his comrades for said power. And he does it. Zodd, who is also an apostle, should in theory be present for the feast that follows, but he instead elects to stay outside the interstice because he knows who will be arriving soon in order to disrupt this sacred ceremony. In his lifetime, Zodd became a legend, not only amongst humans but also apostles, as one of the strongest of their kind. His sole purpose for existing was to seek out the ultimate fighter who could give him the battle of his life. Many a human and apostle had fallen to his blade in his seemingly unattainable quest for the perfect battle, But the one man who kept surviving was a wraith who had wandered through the land of the dead for 1,000 years. Knowing his true motivations, Zodd was sure that the man would show up for the 5th eclipse as well, and he was proven right when Skull Knight galloped up to him and prepared to engage. If you want to know more about him, check out our Skull Knight Origins video. But enough self-promotion. Zodd seemed almost amused at having been right in predicting Skull Knight would show up. After all, he was an enemy of the Inhumans, and Skull Knight presumed that he was given the duty of guarding the doorway to the interstice, given the Immortal One's clear importance in the God Hand's design. But Zodd refutes that statement by reminding Skull Knight what he truly values as a being with supernatural strength. Despite being an apostle, he has no interest in participating in his brethren's gluttonous appetites because he only values the strong, which his old rival should remember well. Skull Knight wagers himself upon his sword, and the two rivals duke it out. It's clear from their interactions that Skull Knight and Nosferatu Zodd are the definition of two warriors destined to do this forever. But on this occasion, Zodd's opponent manages to best him and take off his left arm once again. When Skull Knight re-emerges from the interstice, he is more annoyed by what just happened than enraged, telling his opponent to not think that this has changed anything. To his surprise, Skull Knight not only agreed with him, but also asked him to delay their encounter, which he had never done before. Zodd was ready to crush him just for that slight when he saw the reason why. Guts had managed to survive the eclipse. The Immortal One's battle lust only intensified upon witnessing Guts' mad luck, but he acquiesced to his rival's request and put their encounter on hold for now. He also suggested that Skull Knight scram soon, because once the feast was over, the apostles would burst out of the interstice. But as he witnessed his old rival disappearing with his companions in tow, he internally relished the opportunity of witnessing Guts struggling against his brethren now that he had been branded. The foremost soldier of the Falcon of Light, Nosferatu Zodd finds his life's purpose. For the next 2 years, the Immortal One returned to the life he led before he had encountered Guts, slaughtering random soldiers in search of his ultimate desired opponent. After taking care of a band of 300 mercenaries all by himself, Zodd wonders who could ever fulfill his ultimate wish. He thinks back on the countless humans and apostles he has defeated, thinking that only the wretch called Skull Knight could even come close to giving him the fight of his life. His thoughts wander to Guts for a moment as well, as the Black Swordsman rampage through the apostles has only increased his interest in the mortal. But as he thinks about his ultimate desire once again, a strange event occurs. Zodd is visited by a falcon made out of blinding white light within his subconscious. When he thinks of his ultimate desire, and the Immortal One questions why this is happening, the falcon replies that what he sought were not words, which Zodd instantly understands to be an invitation for a fight. He reaffirms to himself that what he seeks is only strength as he transforms into his apostle form ready for a fight. But for the first time in his life, Nosferatu Zodd enters a state of battle shock. The Falcon of Light moves at blinding speed and chops off Zodd's left horn clean off his head, something Guts had failed to even dent in their first encounter. Zodd thinks to himself that this must be a dream, but the wound on his forehead, the blood spilling from it, and the horn on the ground prove him wrong. For the first time in his life, Nosferatu Zodd has been attacked and utterly defeated in a way that cleaved through his physical and astral bodies at the same time. In a complete state of disbelief, Zodd looks up at the sky and the carrion crows circling the blood-soaked battlefield, and the falcon tells him his desired will arrive in Albion shortly thereafter. Sure enough, the prophecy turned out to be right. As Zodd entered the holy ground of Albion on the morning after the incarnation ceremony, he was greeted by the human visage of the demonic angel that had defeated his astral self, Femto's physical incarnation, aka Griffith. Everyone who was looking at their interaction could not help but feel mesmerized by it. Even the invading Kushan soldiers who had surrounded Guts and the forces of the Holy See present in St. Albion. The master of the Bakiraka clan, Silet, ordered Griffith's capture by any means necessary, and Zodd, who had been kneeling at Griffith's feet, immediately slayed every advancing Kushan in a protective rage. The Immortal One then departed from the scene with his master in tow, pledging his support for the new world that Femto was about to create. His first task as the foremost beacon talon of the Falcon of Light was to engage the still-living counterpart of his eternal enemy. Griffith appeared before Rickert, who was unaware of everything that had happened during the eclipse on the Hill of Swords the latter had created. Guts saw them together and naturally tried to protect his friend Rickert from this literal demon in human skin, lunging at Griffith and demanding an answer as to why he had appeared before them here, of all places. Griffith tells Guts it was to reaffirm his faith in his own dream by checking whether he still felt any human emotions or not. Turns out he didn't, which pissed Guts off enough to swing a Dragon Slayer at his head, but his massive heap of raw iron was stopped dead in its tracks by an equally massive Kushan Ramdo, revealing Nosferatu Zodd as Griffith's personal shield. Their second encounter is much fiercer than the first, and Guts' improvement in swordplay only serves to excite Zodd even further. Their battle sees Guts actually crack Zodd's sword once again, so the Immortal One switches up his battle style and starts using the swords buried in the hill as grave markers for the former Band of the Falcon. Guts manages to use the landscape to his advantage, and Zodd transforms into his apostle form, keeping the pressure up. Their battle destroys the elfin cave that acted as Casca and Guts' shelter from evil spirits, and Casca herself nearly gets caught in it when Griffith suddenly protects her from harm. Surprised by his own actions, the Falcon of Light commands Zodd to stop playing around and carry him off to start fulfilling his dream, which is exactly what the Immortal One does. Zodd is the first apostle to pledge his sword to the Falcon of Light, but he isn't the last. As Griffith leads a two-man assault on invading Kushan forces alongside Zodd, the apostles Locus, Grunbeld, and Rakshas show up and pledge themselves to Griffith's cause, becoming the Falcon's beak and talons, and Zodd becomes Griffith's primary war demon leader in the reborn Band of the Falcon. He leads the charge into Flora's mansion and engages the Skull Knight there, surprised to find his old rival fighting for the sake of a woman, no less. The two eternal rivals are fighting half-heartedly because the object of their attention is the Black Swordsman, who emerges from a hole in the ground as an entirely different beast. Zodd recognizes the Berserker armor with one look and questions if Skull Knight wants Guts to follow the same hellish path as him, but the enigmatic knight remains silent. The two cease fighting and behold the mad spectacle that is the Berserker armor in action, as Guts leaps towards Grunbeld and manages to defeat the Apostle even in his dragon form. The Black Swordsman couldn't save the witch herself, however, and the reborn Band of the Falcon retreated, having accomplished their task. The next time we see Zodd is when the War Demons are commanded to attack Emperor Ganishka's mist form in Vratanus. The Immortal One, who had no trouble dealing with any apostle so far, can't even manage to land a blow on the Emperor, but is conversely the only war demon who can survive Ganishka's lightning bolts. Being struck down by an especially powerful bolt and brought down to Earth, Zodd encounters Guts once again, but this time a prophecy forces him to make a different choice than his usual one. Sonya, Griffith's medium, had predicted that Zodd would be forced to either team up with Guts or fight him in a futile effort real soon. And this was that moment. When Zodd took flight again, he found Guts clinging to his back and reluctantly agreed to team up with the Black Swordsman. Together, they managed to pinpoint and pierce through Ganishka's mist form's weak point thanks to the Dragon Slayer's astral properties. But when they hit the ground again, it was back to business as usual. Zodd demanded that Guts prepare to fight him once again, but when Guts agreed to his demand, he changed his mind. Zodd was present at ground zero of the Great Roar of the Astral World, when the physical and metaphysical collided to bring the world back to a state of fantasia, and was the leader of the Falcons who defeated a group of giants. He was also the last person whom Guts has fought canonically as of now, because after Griffith's invasion of Elfhelm, Zodd engaged Guts long enough for Griffith to kidnap Casca before bringing him back to Falconia in the latest chapter 371. We know a crap ton of stuff about exactly why Nosferatu Zodd was the first apostle we met in the Berserk timeline. He is one of Guts' main enemies and serves as a gauge of the swordsman's grip on his Beast of Darkness. Round 1 was overwhelmingly in Zodd's favor, whereas round 2 was more or less even. Who knows if there will be a round 3 anytime soon, but with the state Guts was in chapter 371, we doubt he'd come out of it alive. Zodd is also important for Griffith, whose path towards ascendance is something he was directly involved with, implying he can, to a certain extent, understand the flow of causality. He is one of the strongest apostles by far, even more dangerous than someone like Grunbeld or Irving in our opinion. So, who exactly is Zodd? Well, we have a broad idea. Who was Nosferatu Zodd in his previous life? To understand who Zodd was in his previous life, we must first understand who Zodd is as an apostle. The concept of an apostle in Berserk works very differently to what we know from our world, in that these creatures are literal demonic beings powered by the flow of evil energy. Apostles are created when a person with the right qualities receives a behelit and activates it at the moment of their greatest despair. This moment is usually one that breaks their entire faith in the world and reduces them to a shell of their former humanity. In essence, it shatters their ambition and soul. At that moment, the behelit transports its holder to the interstice, where that person communes with the God Hand and receives a second life, one that has already been sacrificed to the abyss. Apostles are given only one maxim by the God Hand: to do as they will, to kill as they will, to devour as they will. But this illusion of free will is nothing more than that. In reality, all apostles are subservient to the God Hand and will serve them when summoned to their duty. They also seek to go berserk in the presence of their guardian angels and have an innate desire to commit depraved acts, especially those that violate core societal taboos like cannibalism and violation of consent. Literally every apostle we meet is a paragon of debauchery up until the Millennium Falcon arc, except Zodd. For Nosferatu Zodd, everything, including his own demonic strength, is in service of finding his ultimate strong one who can awaken a battle lust within him as hot as the one invoked by the Berserker armor itself, and preferably kill him while they're at it. The only reason Zodd is called the Immortal One is because no one has been capable of accomplishing that deed to date, not even the Skull Knight. His dedication to battle and his incredible skills at swordplay tell us that, at the very least, he was an extremely skilled warrior when he lived. In fact, he could have been the chief of a war tribe, given the way he usually dresses and the level of battle intellect he clearly possesses. It is unclear as to when Zodd received his behelit, or what caused him to activate it, but we can make a few references from what Sonya says to him in chapter 277. When she tells the Immortal One that he will have to choose between fighting and allying with his nemesis in Vritannis, she also tells him that his counterpart will have to do the same. When Zodd asks who this counterpart might be, she tells him it's the one you're drawn to. Naturally, our minds go immediately to Skull Knight because of the sheer history that exists between the two of them, but we know from the events we recalled earlier that the counterpart is none other than Guts. What makes things interesting here is the fact that Sonya calls Guts Zodd's counterpart, implying that the two of them essentially serve the same role within the story. And if this statement holds true for their pasts, then it's possible that Zodd was a war chief who was forced to give up his beloved in exchange for absolute mastery over the battlefield. In that regard, his story could be quite similar to Griffith as well, because it is a fact that when apostles arise, their resolve in their dreams intensifies to the nth degree. Yet, in order to get there, they must first be broken down to their last bone. And we mean that both literally and figuratively. Zodd has, on multiple occasions, showed that he has a melancholic side to him. He truly regrets the fact that the Skull Knight is the only one powerful enough to stand toe-to-toe with him, and the only reason Guts excites him is because he is basically becoming Skull Knight 2.0. So here's what we think happened. 300 years ago, a war chief who possessed a behelit and was renowned as a demon on the battlefield ended up falling into a deep despair when he lost an important fight, which was a make-or-break type situation. Broken by his defeat, the warrior who once resolved to become the strongest was now forced to face the consequences of not being the strongest himself. As a result of his despair, he ended up activating his behelit and sacrificing the thing that kept his soul tethered to humanity, and emerged on the other side as Nosferatu Zodd, with his purpose of seeking the ultimate strong one restored in his demonic reincarnation. Many people think Zodd shares a connection to Skull Knight and King Geiserix simply because Geiserix's skull helmet also had a lion motif on it, but we think that's quite a stretch, simply because Zodd explicitly states that he has been doing what he does best, aka killing people brutally, for 300 years. When Zodd and the Skull Knight fight outside the Eclipse's interstice, he is clearly aware of the fact that Skull Knight has been opposing the God Hand for a millennium, and he even said as much. This is taken as a sign by some that Zodd must have known Skull Knight back when he was Geyserek as well, or worse, was a part of Geyserek himself that was somehow expelled from his being and given corporeal form. Additionally, thanks to his numerous encounters with the Apostles and even the God Hand, he seems to have an understanding of the way causality works, for he was able to deduce exactly what kind of sacrificial ceremony Griffith's would be just by seeing his attachment to the Band of the Hawk. It is not true that all Apostles can discern the flow of causality, but because Zodd seemingly can, and so can the Skull Knight, which leads to that comparison once again. This is simply not possible, and there is another simple explanation for why Zodd and Skull Knight know each other, and that is the Fourth Eclipse. If Zodd has indeed been an apostle for 300 years, then there is no doubt that he was a part of the Fourth Eclipse as well, as that would have taken place 216 years before Femtos. Skull Knight has been struggling against the Inhumans for a millennium, so it isn't an exaggeration to say that he attacked the premises of the Fourth Eclipse as well, where he would have inadvertently clashed with Zodd, who isn't above attacking apostles in his quest to find his desired ultimate strong one. As for where this war chief of old might have originated from, our best guess based purely on character design would have to be the eastern territories of the human continent, solely based on the fact that Zodd's armor looks a lot like contemporary Kushan armor. That is, when he decides to wear it. The fact that he is subservient to the God Hand to the level that he would kill Wild to see the effect of causality play out in its intended form can be taken as proof of his previous life as a soldier. For most of the reborn Band of the Falcon members who resist their baser instincts are all men who have served in a military capacity beforehand. Despite being Griffith's primary mode of transport and his most trusted frontline soldier, he remains an enigma to his own comrades and is still solely sustained by his battle lust. In 2017, we got a rare spin-off from the main Berserk storyline in the form of the Flame Dragon Knight's Tale, which expanded upon Grunbeld's backstory, but we don't expect something like that to come out again. So for now, this is all we can tell you about Nosferatu Zodd's true origins. Marvelous verdict. Will Zodd's background before becoming an apostle ever be revealed? Will his quest for fighting the ultimate strong one end in his own victory, as he seems to be so sure of? Or will he end up sacrificing himself to protect his master, the Falcon of Light? As Berserk seemingly goes on yet another hiatus, the answers to those questions will have to wait out of necessity. But, given how big a part of Berserk's story Zodd was under Mira-san, we are confident that at some point we will learn of his origins through Koji Mori's direction. For now, we are content with staying a world away from this beast and his inhuman tenacity, all puns fully intended. Because if even apostles can be terrified of Zodd's devotion to the grand scheme of the God Hand, then is there anything that a human can truly do to stop him? That's it for now, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. This has been Corey Whelan for Marvelous Videos. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.